Good evening. Welcome to Straight Talk. This is Eugene Chan, your new host. I'm delighted to have evolved from being a close follower of the show, and I'm honored to take up this role from Michael Trigani. I hope my professional and public service background can contribute to the program and bring other perspectives to our audience. Tonight, my first guest is Bernard Chan, the convener of the Executive Council of Hong Kong. Welcome, Bernard.
Hi, Eugene.
The title of tonight's show is, Does the improvement of the electoral system the answer to Hong Kong's future? Bernard, we all know you were a legislative councillor before and now being the convener of the Executive Council. You have witnessed the different chief executives work for the last few governments, and we realized, in particular the last few years, there are some problems between the administration and the legislature. So do you think this improvement is going to solve the problems we had?
Well, I think the electoral reform is somewhat a must because we are definitely heading to a standstill. And in just the past few years, I think we all can agree that nothing got done in LegCo, in our legislature. So something has to be done. So I also agree that the reform is necessary. But whether it will fix all our problems, I'm not so sure just fixing LegCo is the only solution. There will be still other issues. I mean, a lot of vested interests. Let's just say for housing matters, involved with land issues and so on. There are many stakeholders, many vested interests out there. So it takes the entire community to fix all these issues, long-standing issues. You know, as you rightly put it, Hong Kong's been returned to China for 20-some years. A lot of these long-standing issues are still there, and the reason they're still there is not because of we don't know the answer. We know the answer, but to fix it, it involves many different consensus in the community, and obviously LegCo is one part of it. And I think by having this electoral reform would definitely give us a new path, but it still requires much other work need to be addressed.
Yes, but now, as you know, there's a saying, it takes two to tango. And if we have fixed this electoral of the legislature, but how about the government, the administration? I'm sure we talk about the word bureaucracy, we hear the word all the time. I think it's inevitable that big organizations will have policies and standard procedures and all that. How would you suggest the government to take advantage of this new legislature to move things faster? Because we are definitely behind.
Obviously, I think the problem with it, previously, we do have people in the legislature that oppose for the purpose of just opposing, right? And of no intention of solving the problem. Now, hopefully, now with this coming election and with new LegCo members returning by the end of this year and beginning of next year, hopefully, we can all try to now sit down and figure out, well, how best can we resolve these issues? But by the way, I mean, even with the new structure, we're not saying that there's not going to be anyone opposing anything. Sure, because all those LegCo members being elected, whether they are returned by geographical constituencies or functional or even the election committee, they represent Hong Kong. So I'm sure whoever been elected, they will still need to make sure that there will be proper check and balance in the system. So they're not just going to be a yes man. They will not be. They will continue to hold the government accountable. So, but like you put it, I mean, it takes two. So I think the government needs to also make sure that the proposal being put forward are reasonable and fair, and so that we can get LegCo members to agree on. But then, apart from the legislature, we also need to get the community agree, because LegCo members represent the community. So if we don't deliver to the needs of the community, I can't imagine LegCo member, whoever they're being elected, will agree to the proposal.
Thank you very much for bringing up the word community, because this is what the program is for the community to listen to views. As you know, we have diverse views, and I've done some homework. In March, you had an interview. There were reports saying that you said that the electoral system changes would push the democracy back towards 1997, a backward move. But you have clearly rebutted it and clarified that's not what you stand.
Yeah.
And also in April, you wrote a very good article outlining some of the positive outcomes of the electoral reform. However, many don't seem to be convinced. So maybe this is a good time that you can talk to them and tell them why should we accept such changes, because we need everybody to be together to make this happen.
Well, as you alluded earlier, I was a LegCo member myself for 10 years. And for the first 10 years since the return to the motherland. And of course, the LegCo back then, is, to start with, is also have 3 compositions. Election committee, it started with the election committee, and that's why I referred to, the election committee wasn't something new. It's always been there since the very good beginning in '98. So the election committee, and then of course you have the functional constituency and you have geographical constituencies. Now, obviously, the election committee has only a membership of 1,000+ people, or and so on, or even less back then. But they're supposed to represent a much broader spectrum of Hong Kong. So I think with the current new reform, so we are now back to pretty much the same model where you have geographical constituency, that's the people at large, and then you have functional. Now, functional, obviously, by the nature of it, is somewhat like a vested interest. So you represent different constituencies. So I was representing insurance at the time. So election committee hopefully serve even a different spectrum, because they're supposed to be a larger spectrum and should not be accountable to say, that they have to be always fighting for a small vested interest group. They should be hopefully looking at the larger public interest as a whole. Because I think this is where the problem we are facing today. Either you have a small group interest, or you have like not in my backyard. Nobody wants to make a difficult decision. And the reason why that even essentials such as columbarium, funeral homes, you cannot imagine.
Remember all that, yes.
You cannot imagine any neighborhood will even agree to it. And this is where we're having a problem, right? Where we're going to put all these things? Where we're going to find adequate housing, or so essential services.
With the reform, all this is going to happen.
So hopefully we have also enough representation in in our legislature that look at the larger interests of Hong Kong, but not simply on their own, own constituency or the vested interests.
Yes. There are also recent news reports saying that, especially the Western media, having sort of a coloured spectacles glass look at our system in Hong Kong, saying that we're definitely going backwards. There are fewer business influence in the election committee. Being a person from the business sector, do you agree?
Well, let's not keep referring to this backward. I don't think it was not. I think the key is whatever system we were in earlier clearly is not working. With the social unrest and division in Hong Kong, we need to go forward. We need to find a new model going forward. So I think that is what actually central government have decided, that is no point of where we continue to stay on to where we are, because it's clearly not working in Hong Kong. We're not addressing the needs of the people. And why are the unrest? I mean, the issue behind the unrest is not simply just because of the extradition bill. There were other issues, there are frustrations in the community over a lot of other issues, public issues. So until these issues are addressed, I mean, the division will continue in Hong Kong, right? So I think by having this new reform, hopefully it will give us a chance. Now, the reform is not going to solve the problem. It's still entirely up to Hong Kong people, together with the government, and try to fix this issue, long-standing issue. While I was in Beijing for the National People Congress meeting back in March, Beijing officials make it very clear that we need to address the needs of Hong Kong people. So I think the reform is one thing, but it's important thing is how we're going to use the new reform to allow Hong Kong to move forward.
Yes.
And I think that is even
I'm
more
sure
important.
that's what every Hong Konger will be looking forward to, is moving forward, especially having seen the rest of the world developing at such a fast pace. Just the last question before the break. You mentioned the word yes man. This is what a lot of people are concerned, that with the new legislative council, a lot of them should be patriots. And what if they all end up to be a yes person? Then where are the check and balances? Or they try to act as what the pro-democracy camp did before, as the opposition faction. Will we be back to square one? Meaning they will sort of argue for the sake of arguing, but people will have such questions. What's your view on that?
Well, as I said earlier, I think all legislators, they will be held accountable by their own constituents.
Yes.
So I am pretty sure that all of them will continue to fight for the interests of their constituencies. So they're definitely not going to be a yes man. They will hold the government accountable as well. Now the question is how you do it, right? Do you oppose for the sake of opposing, or we try to find a solution? I mean, I won't agree that government's always right. Government has their blind spots, and so but we need to help the government to help us to fix the problem. By pointing fingers, by just keep blaming on each other, it's not going to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. And we had enough of those already.
I'm sure.
Right? So we should be looking at, okay, what are the genuine needs of Hong Kong people? And that is the key. It's not about the whole process. I mean, we had enough of that already. So the question is that a genuine trust for both parties to work together? Mm-hmm. But I'm very sure that none of the legislators, however they're being elected, will be a yes man, because they have their own constituencies to be accountable to.
Okay. All right, quick break. See you soon. Welcome back to Straight Talk with Eugene Chan. And tonight we have Bernard Chan, the convener of the Executive Council of Hong Kong. In the first part of the show, we talk about the basic background of this reform in our electoral system. But I'm sure all our audience are most interested in seeing how that's going to help our future. Bernard, we all heard of Greater Bay Area, which is right next to Hong Kong. However, many Hong Kongers, they don't have the home return permit, or they have a lot of misunderstanding of what's happening across the border. Being a deputy of the National People's Congress, do you agree to that statement? And what would you do about it if you agree?
Well, Eugene, thank you for your question. I'm from the business sector. So from every businessman overseas that I spoke to, they are very excited. They want to know and find out what's happening in the Greater Bay Area, the GBA, because they know there got to be some potential and prospects. So they're all coming to Hong Kong to find out more about what's happening in GBA. But then you're right. At the same time, here in Hong Kong, surprisingly, a lot of our young people actually are not interested to find out what's happening in the Greater Bay Area. And so this is really a dilemma, when we have such an interest overseas, while yet our own local youth are not very engaged. Now, I don't blame them. I have to say, over many, many years, some of the people in Hong Kong have repeatedly demonized China, demonized the Communist Party. So I can understand why some of the young people are not exactly that keen to find out or to want to know, or even to move there. No, I understand that. But I think it's important for them to also realize the importance of the 70 million. Now, GBA has a population, including Hong Kong, of a size of 70 million. Mm-hmm. So our young people need to understand the importance of 70 million versus our own 7 million.
So about 10 times more, 10 times. Yeah.
Now, some may think that, I don't really care about the 70, I'm happy with 7. But that's not how business works. Because the 70 million will be driving the changes.
I see.
If we don't understand the 70 million, the 7 million will be marginalized. So we need to understand why that 70 is important. Now, once we understand the 70 million market, right, whatever that is, then our young people can decide, depending on their interests, depending on the professions, they can decide to stay onshore or offshore. Onshore meaning you go to GBA, or you stay offshore. You happily stay in Hong Kong, because not all services, Hong Kong people will be better off, onshore, depending on what you do. Like, for example, in financial services, we have many people from the 70 million, not all 70 million, a certain group of 70 million will happily come to Hong Kong to buy service, right? So that's offshore. So, if you understand the 70 million market, and if your interest is in financial services, you may be better off just stay in Hong Kong. But you have to understand the market first. You can't just be in Hong Kong and not understand where your market is coming from. And then at the same time, there are services is that you have to go to the mainland. You have to be in GBA to service that market there. So it's really, I mean, it's not that all people have to go to GBA. It really depends on the interest and your profession, your expertise. But the first thing first, though, they have to understand the market. So I encourage young people. So whenever I see I have many young mentees. So whenever I talk to them, I ask them to try to understand, try to go there and try to find out what it's like, what is happening there. Doesn't mean that you have to move there. It doesn't mean that you have to. You can only be successful being in the GBA. No, you can be just as good staying in Hong Kong, but the market is there. The market is, because that sheer size, so much bigger than Hong Kong. They are driving where we are all heading. Not to mention technology and everything. That is really happening there. So we can't just stay alone. We need. The future of Hong Kong is not just going to be the Hong Kong market. It's going to be the enlarged GBA market.
Right. And having said that, I'm still in one of the professionals. We have looked at professional services into mainland for the last 20 years. We had tours, we have all these exchanges and meetings, but nothing seems to really take off. Do you think it is our own responsibility for the younger generation to just buy a ticket and go over to the GBA and look for opportunities? Or do you think the government has a role? Because Hong Kong people are quite well nurtured or guided over the years. They're quite, I won't use the word spoon feeding, but they do want to have someone to give them a hand and lead them towards it. Do you think the current government can do anything concrete that will have proper results?
I don't think, first of all, the government don't know where the opportunities are.
Right.
They don't know. Obviously, they can help us to build a framework, the whole GBA framework. The mainland authorities in Hong Kong, we work together. But where the opportunities are, I think the people best know about it will be the business sector or professionals.
Right.
So we should leave it to them, to hopefully promote this to the young people. What government can do, however, is providing some financial incentive.
That's what I was thinking.
To business sector. To allow them to perhaps, hire our young people, to maybe on internship or on, on some sort of exchange program, so they can go and find out themselves. I think the business sector themselves can play an even stronger and bigger role in helping our students to understand a bit more about the opportunities in the future.
Right. So really, the carrot should be coming from the sectors itself, hopefully with some support from the government.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah, good. Following on this, you mentioned earlier about all our deep-seated differences in Hong Kong, like education, housing particular, social welfare, elderly, etc., etc. So, do you think by anticipating or engaging with the GBA area, would that give us a new hope in solving the problem that we're facing for so many years in Hong Kong?
Not all. Maybe some. I think years ago, I have been the chairperson for the Hong Kong Councils of Social Service for many years. So even like about a decade ago, I saw that the aging population, is a crisis coming, and we can't really address all that issues just within Hong Kong territory. We probably need best to work, with GBA. At that time, it's no GBA yet. At the time, it's just talking about hinterland, Shenzhen, or even before. So I was expecting, with cheaper land costs, would it make sense that we can relocate some of our elderly facilities into the mainland? So that should be, no-brainer. But turns out, as I, spoke to some of the elders, I found out there's a complete different picture because financially it may make sense. By the way, it may not make sense today because Shenzhen is not cheap anymore. 10 years ago, it was still maybe cheap. Today, it's not cheap. But anyway, even so, we only look at it financially, but when I talk to the elders, it turns out that they are not interested to move because, they feel more comfortable within their neighborhoods because the people they know, they recognize the streets. They don't want to be moved to a new location when they have to learn everything new again. And what worse, they worry their children will abandon them there and not go back to visit them. So my answer is yes. It makes sense that we can take advantage of the bigger GBA to address some of our issue, but you cannot expect that GBA is the only solution. GBA will solve everything.
Right.
It's not so, because after all, we are still two systems.
Yes.
So we are not like New Jersey to New York yet, because certain services and so on are not exactly identical. So, but without GBA, then I think it would be even more difficult for Hong Kong.
Right. So Bernard, let's go back to our topic of tonight is the reform, electoral reform, and we will have 15 election committee members elected in December. The chief executive election is going to be next March. You've been with the government, you have worked with four governments. You met different CEs, and they are all different. If we ask you very briefly, what do you think will be the attribute, what would the most ideal attribute for the chief executive to lead Hong Kong? Because we're definitely in huge challenges right now.
Yep. Well, obviously, the chief executive-elect needs to be trusted by central government. It has to be. Equally, needs to be trusted by Hong Kong people.
Right.
Because after all, he or she needs to govern Hong Kong. So, and of course, not to mention that I think he or she needs to understand the working of the government. So that's why I always say it's difficult if you just parachute someone from the outside with absolutely zero experience in working with the government or in the government.
Right.
So it has to be someone already with that sort of experiences, because otherwise, I think he or she will find it very frustrating, not understanding that within the government, there's always going to be check and balances and so on. So I think, those are the basic that you need to at least
see Bernard, you and I, we belong to the fraternity of 10 outstanding young persons, and we had the opportunity to serve different public services. And your exposure is very wide, from education, art, youth culture, politics, etc., etc. You even chaired the Committee on Reduction of Salt and Sugar for food. You have been dubbed as a black horse for many past chief executive elections. What is your stance? I mean, with all the upcoming opportunities, what are your feelings?
Wow, I didn't see that coming from you. I thought you would have known that I have no interest in working full-time in the government. I'm happy where I am, obviously, in advising the government. And I think that's where the challenge is. We do have a lot of good people in Hong Kong, very talented professional, but for them to sacrifice their career to join the government, that's been tough, and even more tough over the last decade or so when things are so polarized.
Yes.
So I think now, hopefully, with the reform and everything, it might give actually a chance for people who are out there who still want to serve, might willing to come, because otherwise, I think it's a tall order for people.
Thank you, Brenner, for asking you a question, the impromptu question, and thank you for being with us and give us the background of the reform. And we'll see you next week. And take care.